What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Speak the Language podcast. It is an exciting time to be a whitetail hunter right now, especially if you live in the Midwest and a lot of other parts of the country where the rut is kicking full swing right now. And with it being early November, we thought it would be the perfect time to do an episode about calling. And not just about calling, but I mean diving into the specifics of it. What types of calls to use and when. Using a grunt call and a can call together at the same time. Rattling, snort wheezing, calling setups. That's very important. A lot of people don't think about setups when they call. We dive into all of those subjects and a whole lot more, and we do it with arguably the most knowledgeable person in the world, Will Primos himself. Will's been calling deer for a long, long time, longer than me and Jordan, and so we decided we'd sit down with him, pick his brain, see what he thought, and I really think some of the things that he said we could all listen to, we could all kind of put in our repertoire and pull it out when it's that time of year, and I think it could help bring us success in getting a buck into range this year. So I really hope you enjoy it. And lastly, we always get questions in from you guys asking how you can help the podcast. Well, I'll tell you exactly what you can do. You can go to iTunes, to our page. You can give us a 5-star rating and write us a review. It really does help. Enjoy the show. Okay, so on this week's episode of the podcast, we have Will's with us today. Jordan's with us today. So we're doing this podcast, Will, for two different reasons. One of them is because since it's November, a lot of folks in the Midwest and all over the country, it's rut time for them, so they're thinking about calling deer and decoys and all that. And then the second reason is that Jordan and Brad are both going to Kansas. We're leaving on Sunday.
When this podcast comes out, we will be in Kansas.
Yeah, and seeing as I'm probably going to have to film you, I don't want, I want to make sure that I want Will to give you advice so you don't mess up.
I'm going with Troy.
See, you like that joke.
Yeah, he found that amusing.
And so the different things that we could talk about as far as just the different facets and all that. But
is all this part of the podcast?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. We're recording right now.
Okay.
He's tying a knot in my cord over there.
You need to put your mic up towards your mouth, too.
Now it's in
his eye. If anybody could see this.
Lord D. So, as far as, Will, you've been calling at deer for a long time.
Yes, sir.
And so, let's talk about, Jordan, what do you think we should, we've got setup, timing, different calls.
Let me tell you how long I've been calling deer.
Okay.
I've been calling deer so long that in 1986, we produced, before the Truth Series ever got started, a video about calling deer.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to think of an angle because there had to be more than just calling deer. And we were trying to video, and we weren't real successful. But we were trying. We named the video Calling Deer to the Tuned Bow. Every time I think about that name, it just about makes me just crack up. So we got a crew involved, and we showed how to properly set up a bow.
Mm-hmm.
And it was well produced, but lacked in the footage category. That's where the phrase LOF came up.
LOF.
Lack of footage.
Lack of footage.
I have that problem a lot.
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. We got serious LOF.
That's why we're doing podcasts now.
To make up for it.
You don't have to have footage for this.
But what caused this phenomenon or this unbelievable, I never heard a deer do that. What's going on? What are y'all talking about? Are y'all making this up so you can sell calls? Mm-hmm. What are you talking about? The country grew up with not too many deer, mm-hmm. especially in the southeast. So you ran dogs mm-hmm. to get them out of the swamps, to get the deer moving, and to run across people. And that's the only time they ever saw deer. So they never were around deer in their natural state, mm-hmm. going through the pre-rut, going through the rut, going through the post-rut. And so deer were not calling to each other and were not interacting verbally, vocally, except at night.
Right.
Because you ran dogs, and they were running for their life trying to outrun the dogs. And back then, nobody used calls. So it got started in different parts of the country where people quit using dogs. And the primary reason for that was that they were expensive. Expensive to keep them year-round and to feed them and to have a pack of dogs. And so the dog men are fewer and far between, especially in today's time, in this year, 2019. But all that began back in the 60s and 70s in the Southeast, especially. And as it went on, dogs got harder to pay for, harder to afford, and people began to still hunt. And all of a sudden, somebody's still hunting, and they see this buck dogging a doe coming out on the edge of a food plot or something going, and they're beginning to understand, oh, he's grunting at her. He's telling her to stop. He's telling her to hold up. And next thing you know, you're getting balanced herds. You're getting an opportunity where you're seeing one doe to one buck because people have managed the land, managed the herd, killed the does. If they kill 10 bucks, they kill 10 does. They kept the herd balanced. And so vocalizations became more and more and more observed by the general hunter. And that's what really caused the popularity to just go through the roof.
Right. You could even, I guess you could see that more on like a more modern scale, I guess, as I can remember, like in the place where I grew up at when I was younger, there was still, not a lot, but there was still some dog running and that sort of thing, and there was no herd management, and so deer calling was something that was kind of foreign to me because, everyone's like, it doesn't really work here. And then someone taught me, about, well, the reason it doesn't work as well in that situation is you've got a herd that's all out of whack. You don't have bucks. A buck you have a 1 buck to 6 doe ratio. So there's not really any competition.
How about one buck to 20 does?
Right. So when the rut comes around, they don't really have to work for it. They don't have the reason to be grunting and roaring and fighting each other, competing for it.
Yeah. So, don't get me wrong. Hunting with dogs is a social event and is extremely entertaining and fun. Back in 1979, I got invited by a man named Butch Stallings, a gentleman from Mobile, Alabama, to go near Gadsden, Alabama, if I remember correctly. And I remember the swamp was called Bone Swamp. And they brought in Catahoula hounds. Primarily, these hound owners were from Louisiana. And they brought in all these guys that were friends of theirs, and they let these Catahoula hounds loose in this swamp. I killed a beautiful 7-point, actually an 8-point, but one brow tine was broken. But, I mean, it was amazing being there and watching the deer going in circles and going around and running through that swamp trying to get away from those hounds. So it is a way of hunting, and it was a lot of fun. But when you get a herd that's balanced and you get an age class, you've got your 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5-year-old bucks, and they're competing. It's more fun than that. It's more fun than dog running.
Yeah, I can still remember the first time I saw a buck respond to a grunt call and then come right in. Let's go with that. Do you remember the first time that you called a deer in?
Oh yeah.
Is that a story you want to tell?
Well, I was a member of Russell Davis's camp down at Rattlesnake, Mississippi, which is near Hermanville, Mississippi, and I was on a ridge, a very narrow ridge, and I walked out on the ridge where it fell off into the swamp, into the creek, and I'm sitting there, and I picked up my grunt call and just. And around that tip came this 135, 140-inch 8-point. And it's the first time I ever had a deer respond to it, and he is looking like crazy. I couldn't believe it. I was shooting my custom-made 308 Brown Precision with a fiberglass stock, and I shot him at about 40 yards. What a wonderful experience. That was 1986.
So, this is an exciting time. For the first time in Primos Speak the Language podcast history, we're going to be offering a promo code specifically to our listeners. And since we're talking about the rut, we're talking about calling, we're talking about November, decoying deer, we're going to give y'all 15% off all deer calls, the Scar Decoy, and all trigger sticks. So like in these stories you hear us talking about using the can, the grunt tubes, there's no better time to go pick up a can, a buck roar, a Scar Decoy, a bipod trigger stick, whatever you want. Use the promo code and get 15% off. All you have to do, go to the website, and when you check out with one of these items, enter the promo code capital P hashtag RUT19, and the word RUT is in all caps. Again, capital P hashtag RUT in all caps 19. Check it out now at primos.com.
Jordan, you remember the first time you caught a deer in?
I've been sitting here thinking about it. Probably, I don't know what year it was, but I was probably 12, 14 years old, something like that. And I climbed in a tree with my climbing stand and a privet thicket along a creek. And I was doing the can.
Where were you?
In Lake Mississippi.
Lake Mississippi.
Yeah, that's where I did all my hunting up until I started doing all this. But anyway,
until you started working for Primos.
Yeah, well, pretty much when I started at Giles is when I started traveling a little bit.
Okay, working for Giles Island down in Louisiana, and then Mossy Oak.
Yep. And I was sitting there canning because I'd seen you or Brad do it on one of the videos, and I done did it like 10 times in a row, and here comes a spike 10 yards from me. I was like, man, this thing works. And that was probably my first time I ever caught a deer up.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I've got a man, we're here at my home right now, and I've got a man that's doing some touch-up painting for me right now. He's a big deer hunter. And he said, man, tell me, I grunted at this deer. I saw him. This is like last week.
Oh, yeah.
So here it is, the 1st of November, and this was the last week of October when he did this, and he grunted at this deer, and the deer came to him and stood there at about 100 yards looking for him. And he said he turned around and walked off. He said, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? He wouldn't come. I said, well, where were you? He said, I was just sitting up against a tree. I said, well, is it open around you? He said, yeah. I said, number one, you want to sit down where it's thick around you so the deer got to look for you. Mm-hmm. And I said, the most powerful sound he can hear, and I think it's a little early. His name is Hal. I said, Hal, it's a little bit early, but try the can. What's the can? He had no idea.
Really?
Yeah, so I gave him a can. And the next day, he went back, and he saw that same buck walking. He's out on the edge of a cutover is the way I understand it. And he saw that buck walking, and he turned that can over, and that deer turned and ran to him.
Wow.
He got to 60 yards, and he missed him with a crossbow.
Man.
I bet it was fun up to that point,
It
though.
was. He loved it. He loved it.
That is one, because we get questions regarding setup all the time, and I can remember doing that in my younger days. I'd be sitting in wide open hardwoods, you can see forever, and I'd see a deer and I'd grunt at it, and then I'd wonder why he would just look my way and not come.
Because he can see everything. He can't see the deer because he's thinking, where's the deer?
Right. And that's, we try to, the best example that I can think of in recent years is there was that 7-point that I filmed you shoot at Togo.
Yeah.
That one, we were up in that real
unbelievable calling hunt.
Mm-hmm. And I think it worked. Part of the reason it worked is we were in a position when you were grunting like that, they could not see.
Actually, 2 bucks came at the same time, and they split the distance.
Right.
They split on each side of the tree.
Right. But they were, because of where it was and all that big thicket and nasty briars and vines behind us.
They couldn't find us.
Right.
One time, Brad and I were in Pike County, Illinois, and we were down in the bottom. We came off a big hill down in the bottom, and we're trying to figure out where we're going to set up. And there's it's a drainage type ditch. It's not a creek. It doesn't have water flowing in it year round. A lot of the year it does, but it mainly is used by flash flood, a lot of heavy rain to get the water out of that bottom. Mm-hmm. And so it's pretty big. It's probably 10 yards, 30 feet wide, and 10 feet deep. And so we had no cover, but we knew where we needed to get set up next to this grass field down in that bottom. And so we chose the edge of that creek. Mm-hmm. And the reason being if we had the opportunity to call and a deer looked over there, he knows where the creek bed is. The deer could very easily be in the creek bed, and the deer was going to have to come close to us to see the bottom of the creek bed. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a treetop, a cane thicket, or actually a visual obstruction. It can be contours.
Right.
It could be a big rock. It can be a creek bottom, whatever. And so we were able to kill that buck. Buck came through, and we called to him, and he came to about 25 yards trying to look into that creek bottom to find the doe. We were able to kill that buck.
Right. The same kind of situation. You're in somewhere where he can't just look and go, there's not a deer there.
That's right.
If he has to come investigate for it to, for him to see if there's a deer there or not.
Same way with me and you in Illinois, 4 years ago?
Yeah.
3 years ago, I was hunting. We were hunting separate just on a fun hunt, wasn't videoing. And I had this buck. I would actually been blind calling. And right at dark.
And blind calling
is calling without seeing a deer.
Okay.
And I've just been doing that periodically, every 10, 15 minutes, just acting like imitating a chase.
So you're grunting and doing the can.
Yep.
Did you snort, wheeze at all?
No, okay. Not until I saw the deer. Or I was looking at, after I'd called and everything, I saw this buck coming. Well, he was going to go too far from me to get a shot. Well, I let him pass me, and I was in a CRP field right on the fence row. It was thick on both sides, so I was 8 feet off the ground. Wasn't high at all, but I was in a thicket. And he passes me at probably 60 yards going towards the lake.
You're bow hunting.
Right. Going straight towards the lake. And I grunted. And
you can't let lake kill this deer.
No, I grunted at him, and he stopped and looked. And he started walking again towards the lake, and I snort wheezed, and he couldn't see, so he had to turn around and walk 10 yards from me because he had to come up there and look.
He did leave out the part of the story where he told me, man, I could hear you rattling, and then I saw that buck walking towards you.
Yeah. In other words, he caught him. Well,
kind of like turkey hunting. He was my caller.
My incredible friend, Paul Korn, and we're talking about friends. In your life, you go through life, and you meet those people. Mm-hmm. And I describe Paul Korn this way. If I'm ever in a plane crash, I want there to be at least one survivor, and I want it to be Paul Korn, because you'll both get out alive. He cares that much about you. He's that good of a friend, and he's a team player. Well, Paul ended up being a friend with Paul Fountain from Iowa, who's got some incredible opportunity to hunt places in Iowa. And so Paul leased a farm from him. And Paul got in there, and Paul was an injection mold engineer. He understood how to mold stuff, and he owned an injection mold plant called Prism Plastics. And that's where Primos built a whole lot of their plastic parts. Mm-hmm. So he was learning about calling from me and one thing or another. And he had gotten one of our calls that he actually built, which had a grunt, snort, wheeze on it and all that, everything built into the call. So this big buck, he's hunting this big buck that he's got pictures of, and he's in a ravine bottom the way I remember it. And he sees the buck, and the buck comes by, and he grunts at him. And the buck stops and looks back at him. Paul's uphill slightly. Buck looks back at him and then continues walking, just like yours did, Jordan. And so Paul goes, well, I ain't never heard a deer do this, the way I remember Paul telling me, but I'm gonna try this snort wheeze thing that Will Primos told me to try. And Paul said he wheezed at that buck, and his bow is hanging on a bow hanger, and he could not get his bow off the bow hanger in time. The buck was 10 yards from his tree before he could even get his bow off the bow hanger. Mm-hmm. And he killed the buck. Boone and Crockett, absolutely monster.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So calling can be so effective. It's all about timing. Mm-hmm. Just because it doesn't work one time, it might not work again. The Southeast is typically can be warm during the rut, during your November, December, January times. And I had a friend down in Natchez who'd never used the can, and I said, get close to a cutover where you know that they're hiding and living during the day. And when you think things are quiet and everything's kind of right, get your can out and just turn it over and meh. Wait a few, meh, 3 times. And the last time, a little more pause. Because you're making that buck hear it and then get interested in it. And he said, I did that. And he said, I could not believe how intense this beautiful buck came to me, came straight out of that cutover and straight to the edge of the cutover where I was hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And he killed him.
Yeah.
He killed him with a gun, but still, he was close.
One thing that you said that I think is worth touching on again, because I hear this a lot. I'm sure all of y'all have. It's like that they'll go out there and they'll say, all right, I'm going to try this calling thing. And they'll call like one time, nothing happens. They go, oh, well, that doesn't work. And they never really, they never really try it again. They if they are blind calling, or even if they see a buck and it doesn't work out, they think, that didn't work. It's like they don't want to try it again, which oftentimes for us, it doesn't work the first time we do it.
And during the rut, I call way more as far as making deer noises than I would turkey hunting.
Yeah.
I do. I'll never stop, really. I give it a 5-10 minute break and I'm grunting.
I've thought about it. And I don't know if y'all would be willing to do this or not. But I think that we need to have a section of videos because we've got so much absolute live, no edit footage of calling up deer. I'm thinking of one right now where Johnny St. Clair was videoing me up at our farm. And the buck was walking through a freshly cut over area, and he was 100 yards away. And I grunted at him, and he couldn't hear me. And so I wheezed. Now, a wheeze is higher pitched and travels faster and further than the low-pitched grunt sound. When I wheezed at him, he stopped on a dime and looked straight at us. I grunted at him. Nothing. I turned the can over. And he marched straight to us. Yeah. Now, he's a 4.5-year-old deer. He didn't have much horns. He wasn't I remember him being a 110-inch type deer. But, that deer walked straight to us. Understanding, number one, how far they can hear, when they're walking. When he finally did hear me and then focused on us and then heard the bleat and came straight to us, all that is experience and being willing to try stuff.
Mm-hmm. Because I would say a lot of that comes from just trying things over and over again until you start piecing that together.
What would it be if we got they could be short excerpts of all this calling footage where we've actually called up deer, unedited, live action on video, so people could begin to grasp it and understand it and give them confidence to try it. That'd be pretty cool.
Absolutely.
It would be worth doing 100%. Because especially, because like we said, this is the whole reason we're doing this podcast episode with it being November. These questions like that start flooding in this time of year because everyone's breaking their calls out. They're thinking about, especially in the Midwest, And
you think about this, too. If you're not calling enough and you're hunting a semi-thick area where you can't see but, 100 yards. Or
whatever, how about 5 yards?
Or whatever. But during the rut, those bucks are traveling miles a day.
Miles.
And if you don't call at the right time, blind calling is what I'm talking about, he never hears you because he's steady cruising looking for a doe.
Yeah. You could have a buck walk by your area that you never knew was in the world and you never called to him.
So don't be afraid to call.
What's amazing is a lot of times we'll hunt in food plots because we know that deer are needing greens, they're needing to find a food source. And there'll be a deer out there in a food plot 75 yards away. Mm-hmm. And we're in a tree on the edge. And we're not going to shoot the deer for whatever reason. It doesn't meet our classifications or whatever the case may be. And we pick up a grunt call and go, and he looks up and goes back to eating. Many, many people do that. Mm-hmm. And they think, that deer just heard something. He ain't interested. What's going on? The deer is in the open. He's not in a position where he is looking for another deer. And he sees calling coming from the edge. All of that works against him. Mm-hmm. It's like I talk about calling turkeys. If you calling turkeys to what I call as a wall, they're not coming. A wall can be Mary, just let the tree right there. See him? Clap, do something. He ain't gone far. He's gonna come back. See, he lit right there.
He getting your birds.
Mm-hmm. Mary, go out there and clap your hands, Eddie. He's just sitting there waiting to get one of them bluebirds.
Yeah, we can edit this.
Okay.
I think we ought to leave it.
If you leave it, a hawk just flew in here. Mary and I feed the birds, and we got a bunch of bluebirds, and we feed them mealworms. Plus, we've got all kind of red-bellied woodpeckers, red-headed woodpeckers. We got nuthatches. We got wrens. We got redbirds. Oh my gosh, we got some birds. But we just had I don't know, it kind of looks like a peregrine falcon. I'm not sure what kind of hawk. It's a little smaller hawk. Mm-hmm. And they come in here, and I've actually witnessed them scare the deadgum birds, and then another hawk comes in and grabs them out of midair. Mm-hmm. That hunting teams.
Yeah, smart critters.
Anyway, where were we before we got messed up with the hawk?
You were talking about walls. You're creating a wall.
So, same thing for elk. If what you're against is a wall of timber, very thick, a stone wall, which would be an actual wall, so to speak. Deer, elk, turkeys, they're not going to approach that. You don't want to create a wall to call against. You want to create something where the animal can see around you, past you. It might be thick exactly where you are, but you want to be able to create a situation to where that animal interprets that as, I'm coming over there to check it out, and it's nothing to keep anything from jumping on me.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem unnatural.
Exactly.
Right.
Doesn't seem like a wall.
Right. And I think, like we talked, like I said earlier, that's most people that are skeptical about calling. That's probably like the only times they've ever tried it. It's when they're like looking at a deer in a food plot.
Exactly.
Well, that doesn't work.
It's the reason I brought that up.
Mm-hmm. I think, and we talked about this before too, as far as setup goes. You're talking about getting in thickets where you can see 100 yards, 20 yards, 5 yards. A lot of people, they think they need to be in spots where they can see forever, and so they miss out a lot of those good calling spots.
The edge of a food plot, I consider a wall. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to try to call a turkey out of a field, I'm going to be 50 yards behind the edge of that food plot, because I got to get them into the woods looking for me.
Right.
They're not. If you're calling from the edge, it's going.
I can see everything over there.
I don't see no turkey sitting there.
Right.
I don't see any deer sitting there.
Right.
Same kind of deal.
Well, it's like in like one of the stands that you and I hung in Kansas. We're not hunting to hunt the edge of that field per se. We're hunting in that drain where we're expecting the deer to be traveling through.
So, Will, this area in Kansas. You turkey hunted up there.
Okay.
It's where we saw the prairie chickens, right?
Oh, yeah, okay.
It's right north of it. That creek runs through there. That beautiful, crystal clear.
I forget the name of the store that was one of the last water sources for the people on the Oregon Trail.
Yeah.
Going west.
It's right there.
And yeah, they had a store there, and this outlaw, I forget the name of the outlaw band. They wounded the wife and killed the husband.
I remember that story. I think that guy.
We were right there.
Yeah.
And there was a plaque commemorating that place. It was water boiling out of the ground. It was the last artesian source of water going west.
Yeah. But this spot we're hunting this year is right there. Big old drain just coming down that same creek that the artesian well's on. But anyway,
it's absolutely beautiful.
It's
gorgeous.
100-acre bean field, the closest bean field within 5 miles of there. Talking about this is a money hole. But anyway, the tree we put this stand in is a turn in the creek right there. And this creek juts out towards the field and makes a 90.
So you got a funnel.
Back in the woods, exactly. Big bedding area right north of us, probably 300 yards, and you can see in it from the stand. But calling where we're at, any deer within a half mile, if you get loud enough, it's going to look down there off these bluffs. You know how the bluffs are up there. And big rolling hills going into this bottom. Any deer looking from there is going to assume that deer is in that creek or right behind us in that little thicket.
Or has moved on.
Yep. So I mean, it is outstanding.
Like as far as a calling setup, Jordan was, we were hanging. We both climbed up there and looked around and we're like, that's a calling spot right there. Like I'm so eager to see what comes out of there.
Well, for us, I've learned so much from being a part of the Quality Deer Management Association, QDMA, and just they're teaching about aging deer and understanding whitetail behavior and understanding the life of a whitetail has added so much to my hunting. I've got a friend, Paul Ellis, and he's got these great bucks on his place, and he sends me a picture and he'll say, I don't think this one's very old. And I said, well, you're looking at the horns. Don't look at the horns. Take the horns off his head. And you got different little things that add to the nuances of aging a deer based on the time of year. If it's September, if it's October, if it's November. For us here in Mississippi, you get into December, you're getting more into the rut and body, little nuances that you got to take into effect. But the same thing applies in different degrees in other parts of the country. But there's characteristics of a deer that's 1.5, 2.5, 3.5. And once they get to be 4.5, there are characteristics that tell you that deer is 4.5 or older.
Right.
And then you start looking for the characteristics that will help you discern that, he might be 5.5.
Right.
Dang it. He could be 6.5. So after 4.5, you begin to learn how to look at the characteristics of the body. It's no different than looking at a human being. You can look at a human being and go, he's in his 40s. Oh, he's in his 50s. Oh, that joker's in his 80s. And different people age a little faster or slower than other people.
Right.
Based on their diet, what they eat, how they exercise. There's things you can do to improve the way you look. Same thing for deer, but they have hereditary different characteristics that allow you to be able to judge them and get pretty close to their age.
Right.
It's amazing. I love hunting with Jordan because I'll look at a deer and they go, And I know what I think, but I say, Jordan, is he old enough? Shoot him.
That's all that matters.
Yeah. So, in other words, he's agreeing with what I'm thinking. That deer's 4.5 plus.
Right.
And then there's times when you don't want to shoot a 4.5.
Yeah.
You've got a 4.5-year-old that's a 10-point. You're going, ooh. At 5.5, he may be something.
Right.
But if he's an 8-point at 4.5, so what tells me that? One of the number one things that I look for and that I've learned from QDMA, if his shoulders are bigger than his hams, he's 4.5 plus.
Right.
Now I start looking at his neck, his wattles, how low his neck comes in on his body, how black his hocks are, different little things that tell me he might be 5.5.
Yeah.
Which helps me decide whether I want to shoot that buck.
Correct. Yeah. I always feel like the 5-year-olds too, it's like that size difference between the shoulder and the hams is even more exaggerated.
Yeah.
Like I think it might have been Brad, but it was something always stuck at me. Saying when they get 5-year-old plus, they start getting shaped like a wheelbarrow.
That's right.
It's true. If you look at those old deer,
all front end.
Yeah.
And neck's low, comes in low to the chest.
Right. There's not really any distinction between their chest and their neck. It all just kind of flows.
Don't look at the horns.
Mm-hmm. That's what Jordan always does when he's asking me how old I think one is. He goes, look, and he takes his hand and he covers his horns up in the pictures where I can't see.
Yeah, that's a great test.
Because even if you don't, even if you know, like, because sometimes I'll catch myself doing it. I won't just stare at the horns, but I'll tie that into the equation. I cover them up.
And I don't think anybody can be perfect. I love what QDMA does. They take 4 or 5 experts and have them age a certain deer, and those experts will disagree. Sometimes you'll have 4 of them say, hey, 4.5. And that last number 5 will go, he's 5.5 plus. And here he gives his reasons why. Who knows if he's right or wrong?
Right.
Only way you know if he's right or wrong is to take a tooth and send it off and have it microscopically examined.
Yeah. It's definitely, it can be finicky. I can remember, I mean, there's been deer killed that everyone thought was 3, and then you pull the bone and he turns out he's 7, and then there's some you think are older, and then he turns out to be 3.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It happens. It absolutely happens. But as far as that setup that Jordan's talking about and that creek bend, I can't, I imagine.
So who's going to hunt there?
Brad.
And who's videoing?
Like,
Well, this might be a mistake.
Why?
Because Brad will see one of them big Kansas deer. It'll be 2.5, and Brad will think he's 5.5. Yeah. he needs to be reined down a little bit.
yeah. I got a spot that I'm really looking forward to go to. It's a spot me and Jimmy Riley hunted 6 years ago. Me and him found
Jimmy Riley from
Giles Island.
Okay.
I filmed him shoot a really nice deer at Mr. Jerry's years and years ago, and anyway, the spot we call the Killing Tree, and there's been a lot of deer got opportunity to shot out of it, and it's just an improving spot. So, and it's another really good calling spot. It's got a cedar thicket that butts up to it, and you're 40 yards off a cedar thicket, so any deer running up and down the prairie, if you call to them, they're going to think it's coming from that cedar thicket.
See, that's the point.
Yeah.
Got something behind you that the deer can look into, and so there's no wall there.
Yeah.
They're behind there somewhere.
But we are going to bring Scar.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
Well, I'm going to tell you what. I've had more luck with a deer decoy if I use another decoy in a thicket.
Right.
Especially on a food plot.
Uh-huh.
So you set the buck up. You got the wind in your favor. The wind's blowing in your face. You set that buck up where you want that deer to approach. But you set the buck up so he's looking under your tree stand in the thicket behind you. Mm-hmm. And I've used a Montana decoy because they're real portable. You can fold them up. And I'm not putting legs on them. And I'm taking a doe Montana decoy and setting it in the thicket so you can see part of the back, the head and neck. And the buck is staring at that. How many times have you seen that yourself? I know I have seen it a lot.
Bunch.
So the doe's bedded up. She's not ready to breed. And that buck is standing there. And he's going to stay right there. He's going to lay down. He's going to stand there, whatever, until she gets up and moves.
He's guarding the queen.
He's guarding the queen. And if you do that with a decoy and another buck walks into the field, he does not get suspicious.
Right.
When you've got a decoy and the decoy is staring in a certain direction and a buck walks into the field and the decoy does not address the intruder, the flag goes up. Something's not right. Because if you'll watch any deer that approaches another deer, if that deer is locked in on something, that deer will wag its tail. Mm-hmm. It will let that other deer know, I'm alive, I'm looking at it, but I'm not taking my eyes off it because it might be a hot doe or it might be danger. Whatever it might be. So that other buck begins to circle the decoy, the buck that's looking at the object, and that's when you get your shot.
Yep.
So having something that the other deer can see that the decoy is looking at is magical.
Mm-hmm. But you want the Scar facing you.
Facing you
ears
and
towards
the
you.
deer that's bedded.
Right.
Yep. And that's because that buck that's coming in is going to circle around in front of him or beside him.
And face him.
Okay.
It's the same. It's the same kind of like concept as when we're talking about calling. Like you're trying to build something that makes it look the most real to the deer. You know, you don't want him to come out and look like something foreign to him. You know, like something he sees a doe. You know, he sees a buck out there staring at a bedded doe. That makes sense to him.
And when you add all this in with calling, you got a realistic situation.
Yeah. The last time I was by myself, I got to hunt by myself, I was at Cottonmouth, and I was in the turkey field.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a decoy, and I took a Montana doe and set it up in the thicket. And I had 3 different 3.5-year-old bucks come in that field and march straight to that decoy coming around because they could see him looking at that doe who was bedded there.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And all the time you hear people say you can't decoy a deer in the South.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, you can.
You hear it all the time. Like, hey, you can't do it. Those deer don't act that way down here.
Hate to tell you, But if you do it right, they will react just like a deer reacts.
What about, let's talk about rattling. People ask about that all the time. When do you rattle? What time of year? How often do you rattle? How many times a day? You know, how many times when I'm in my hunt should I rattle?
Well, for me, you can answer all those questions. But I've been lucky enough to observe, I don't know, a dozen fights. Most of those fights are so brief and so quick that they create curiosity rather than an ongoing noise commotion that a deer will come to. So these two deer look at each other, they size each other up, and bam, they hit. Bam. And it's over that quick. And all of a sudden, they're both running off. Neither one of them want to get into it. Neither one of them decided they can win, and they're gone. So what I do is try to create a curiosity effect. The worst thing you can do is rattle, and all of a sudden you look, and there's the deer standing there looking at you, looking up in the tree, and you've got a rattle horn in each hand. It don't work. Whether you're hunting with a bow or a gun, it don't work.
Right.
So what you want to do is create, bam, and put those horns away and be quiet.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say, too.
And then call. Yeah, and then call. Go ahead. What were you going to say, Jordan?
The number one problem I've ever seen with people rattling it last 30 seconds. That's way too long.
Oh, way too long. I'm talking about rattling for
5 seconds.
5, maybe 7 seconds.
Just
And
boom,
then,
boom.
And then be quiet for a while. Now, what does a grunt mean? A tending grunt,
That means a hot doe somewhere.
that's hot dough. But if you're something more,
He is mad about
he's
something.
mad about something. He's mad about. So you do that, and what you're doing is you're simulating, you're imitating, you're reproducing another buck telling another buck, "Stay away from me and my doe." That's typically what it means. What's the next step? A roar. I am hot. We're going to get into it. Stay away from me. And so another buck is listening to that. And then what's the next step?
Snort wheeze.
Snort wheeze.
Snort wheeze.
Once you, that buck is on the edge as close as he can be from diving off. He is fixing to slam another buck.
Yeah.
And that's what he's telling that other buck. So when you do that, you're telling the buck that's listening to it, they're fighting over a doe. They're preoccupied. They're very busy. If I sneak over there, I might be able to get it on the doe. And so that's when you can call one up. But you've got to do it and shut up and let them search you. Let them hunt you. You can't hunt a deer where he is. You got to hunt him where he's going to be.
It's funny. I've seen the exact scenario you just said. I saw that play out in a cornfield in Iowa, a fresh cut cornfield. There was some 2-3-year-old bucks out there. Both of them doing that kind of, they'll start sizing each other up and kind of sidestepping each other, bristled up. And they were fighting, and then one was running off. In the middle of all that madness going on, another 3-year-old buck runs out from the woods and takes the doe.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Me and you would do the same thing.
Oh, me. But yeah, it's rattling is probably one of the most, well, all of it's fun, but we tend to get so many questions regarding around that, because I think there's just, I don't know, just so many misconceptions about it, or how you're supposed to use it as far as the timing and whatnot. And then the one that would follow up with that is the can. Because it's, a lot of people know about the can, but they're like, how do I, when do I use it? How do I use it?
It all works in together.
Uh-huh.
I don't do one without doing another.
Right.
I'm either grunting and canning or rattling and grunting and canning, and one of the three,
Yeah, most of the time when I'm filming you and you're calling, you're grunting and canning, you're not usually doing one or the other. You're conjoining them together.
Yeah. I remember that hunt that Jordan and I were on, and we had a little 8-point, 4.5-year-old 8-point, not a huge deer, and we're calling to him a lot,
Right.
grunting at him, bleating at him, and he's halfway browsing, halfway looking, halfway coming, and
But it was in a spot where he couldn't see unless he got within bow range.
That's exactly right. And he was almost in bow range. He was, 40 yards. And all of a sudden, something catches my eye. And in that thicket behind us, a really nice buck came up.
Yeah.
And he heard me tell Jordan, if I remember the story exactly right, that the big buck was right there on us. I mean, he's at 15 yards. So he got spooky and circled around us. I shot at him at 60 yards, and he reacted, turned around, and the arrow barely touched his neck. 30 minutes later, Jimmy killed him.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. Me and Will looked at each other.
I remember that part. Jordan said, "You reckon Jimmy just killed that deer?" I said, "No way." And we got to the skinny shed, and it looked like the same buck. He was very distinguishable. And it looked like the same buck, but I'd already showed Jordan my arrow where a few hairs were up under the broadhead, up under the rage where one of the blades expanded, had deployed. And I looked at the side of his neck. It wasn't even where it was bleeding, but it cut the hair off and cut through that white part of the hide.
Yeah, he didn't even cut into the flesh.
Yeah. You're like, what are the chances that would happen like that?
Only Jimmy.
Only Jimmy.
But Jimmy, he loved it.
Oh, he ate it up. He still talks about that.
Oh, yeah. It's like,
Y'all remember that time I shot Wilbur's buck?
yeah.
Every time, that's what he says.
Jimmy could have never killed that deer, and he would never kill a deer if we didn't run it over him.
That's the way he goes. Oh, is that where I shot Wilbur's buck? That's how he every time.
Oh, yeah.
That was that season I shot Wilbur's buck.
Oh, yeah.
He was a real nice buck.
Oh, yeah.
That's all the time he talks about it.
Jimmy is a jerk.
Oh, man. Jordan, what have we not covered? Keep me on track here.
We've covered it all spectrums, I think. I mean, only thing we haven't covered is the different phases of the rut and how that kind of plays in with your calling or whatever. But to me, I call the same all the time, whether it's pre-rut, middle of rut, whatever.
Well, what is pre-rut to a early buck might not be pre-rut to a buck that's normally in the rut. In other words, you just never know.
Yep.
So go ahead and be a deer and let the cards fall where they may.
Act like you're a deer. They'll think you're a deer, and they may come see if you're a deer.
Yeah. I want to close with one last thing.
Okay.
And that's the approach that you make to where you're going to make your stand, where you're going to hunt. A lot of people do not take that into account. Mm-hmm. And they will approach with the wind at their back. They'll cross the area they're going to hunt, then turn around and get the wind in their face. Mm-hmm. Remember that the approach to your hunting spot is probably the number one detriment to your success. If you approach with the wind at your back, it ain't going to work.
Don't let that wind blow into where you think them deer are.
Never.
Mm-hmm.
Not with your scent.
Never.
If you do, you'll be scratching your head going, why am I not seeing anything?
Why am I not seeing anything?
Take the long way around and make sure you stay
Jordan,
downwind everybody.
you have been a master at that.
Oh, I can't think of any ways or reasons, but if
Oh,
you
yeah,
say so.
I can think of me asking, Jordan, why do we have to go all the way around here? Because the wind is never going to be right. Yeah, I got you.
That's that Giles Island guide in him.
There you go. He's good at it.
He is. He is. I can't fault him there.
Well, guys, I've enjoyed visiting with y'all. I look forward to deer season. We're fixing to be into our special time of year. I wish I was going to Kansas with you, but I'm glad y'all are going. And I tell you what, Mr. Jerry, what a fine family.
It don't get no better than
No.
them people.
What a fine family.
They have treated me like a son.
No, they're
Hey,
good folks.
He killed him a big old elk this year.
Mm-hmm.
And his buddy, Mr. Cricket,
Cricket ain't allowed this year. He ain't being able to. They won't let him come with us.
why not?
He won't behave.
Wait a minute, he's never behaved.
It was a grand spectacle on that elk hunt, I tell you.
Yeah.
Golly, it was funny.
Mr. Armstrong is the #1 cricket supplier for the Southeast, and that's why we call him Mr. Cricket.
Yep.
Yeah.
Y'all, if anybody buys crickets at PetSmart or Petco, wherever, they're buying Armstrong crickets in the Southeast.
That's exactly right. All right, guys, enjoyed it. Y'all be good. Thank y'all. Have good luck in Kansas.
Yes, sir. Thank you.